Hey everyone, I'm Allison Mars. You're watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
He's hopping in a trash bag.
Oh my gosh. Summer storm slamming the Northeast. The New York City subway is underwater and the rain still not letting up in some parts.
I understand what's happening with the search. However, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop looking for my mom and give up hope.
Holding out hope as the death toll rises in Surfside. Families waiting for their news about their loved ones aren't giving up. COVID cases ticking up across the country. So is it time for Americans to get a booster shot? Pfizer saying yes, but the CDC saying not so fast. We'll ask a medical expert what you should do. Let's start this hour with the latest on the Delta variant. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel is here, along with NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who's in Springfield, Missouri. Shaq, we're going to start with you. You spoke to a fire chief who said the Delta variant is causing a slow-motion mass casualty event. That's a pretty startling description.
Yeah.
I understand less than half of the population in that state is fully vaccinated. So tell us more about what's going on in Missouri. It sounds pretty awful.
It does. And, you know, when you listen to doctors and medical experts, you hear that it is only getting worse. Today at Mercy Hospital Springfield, they said they got there, or they now have the record amount of COVID patients in their COVID wing. We're not talking about a recent record, Allison. I'm not talking about June or July. I'm talking about since the start of this pandemic, they are now at their record number of COVID patients. So they had to surge in equipment, surge in medical experts, and more doctors and physicians to come in to handle this surge. You heard a doctor say earlier this week that this is the worst that it has ever been. That fire chief that said he was witnessing a slow motion mass casualty event likened it to what New York went through a year and a half ago at this point. So they are really struggling with what's going on. I want you to listen to what the fire chief told me.
Vaccine's a whole lot like a smoke detector. You hope you never need it, but if you do, you hope that you have it. COVID-19, particularly the Delta variant, is not something you can call 911 for and I can resolve. It's not something a police officer can fix. You have to take action. You have to become vaccinated and protect yourself. That way, if you do become ill, the illness is much less severe.
You hear the emphasis on the vaccinations. The reason why we were at that fire station is because he has now opened up several of the fire stations around town to vaccination clinics so people can come and get that vaccination dose. Allison?
Shaq, we mentioned Pfizer's going after approval for a third shot, a booster shot, if you will. But
Yeah.
the FDA and CDC are saying, wait a second, Americans who are fully vaccinated don't necessarily need a third shot just yet. What are you hearing about boosters there in Missouri? I mean, the state's struggling to convince people to get their first shots. Are they even thinking about booster shots there?
That's exactly what I was going to say. They are struggling to convince people to go and get that first vaccine shot. So that is the priority here. That's why we're in front of the health department right now, because this is a struggle that folks are having, that local governments are having, that state governments are having in getting people to go and get vaccinated. They are focused on getting as many people vaccinated as possible. You know, in my conversations with doctors, with local leaders, with that fire chief I talked to, you hear a little bit of frustration in their voice. And that's because despite the surge that you're seeing, they're saying this surge is mostly preventable because the solution is right there. Get your vaccine and it gives you that protection. The hospital is saying 95% of the patients in the COVID unit are unvaccinated. That just says it all, Allison.
Yeah, it sure does, Shaq. How about the Delta variant? Is that pushing people to get the vaccine there? Is it frightening them at all?
Yeah, you know, I spent some time at a couple of different vaccination clinics across this town here. And I will say it's important to note that if I'm spending time at a vaccination clinic, that means these are people coming to get their vaccine. They made that decision to get the vaccine. But one of my main questions was, why now? Why did you decide to get the vaccine? And some people said, yes, it was the Delta variant. Others said that it's not that they were avoiding it. It's just that it wasn't a priority for them, including this next gentleman I want you to listen to. He said that he wasn't avoiding. There's not like he had a grand hesitation with the vaccine. He always knew it was there and knew it was available, but it wasn't until it hit home. That is when he made it a priority. Listen here.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it, especially right here in Springfield. I know it's pretty bad, and you know, that was part of it. But the main reason was just we should have got it done sooner. So, but luckily, you know, like I said, none of us have had it or been sick or anything. But once my dad got sick, we're like, yeah, let's do it.
Allison, his dad is 81 years old. He's been fighting with the virus for the past 2 weeks. He says that it's gotten really tough at times. He thinks his father will be okay in the end, but that's what it took for him to kind of change up his schedule. He says he works day in and day out, and that's what it took to make vaccination a priority for him. The hope that you hear from medical experts is that there are more people like him, more people not suffering with a family relative or a family member suffering with the virus, but more people who now take this virus seriously, Allison.
Yeah. Yeah, people realizing that the vaccine is important and it's time to go. Shaq, thanks so much for your reporting throughout the week. Have a good weekend. Fully vaccinated students don't need to wear masks in school. The CDC out with that news today. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. And man, am I glad you're here, Dr. Patel. We have so many questions for you today. That news is pretty welcome for a lot of students and teachers. But we have to take into consideration vaccines aren't yet approved for kids under 12. Your thoughts and any concerns you might have on that latest guidance?
Yeah, Allison, I think that this was the right guidance to issue now because schools are trying to plan for the fall year. And so, of course, if you're 12 and above, it's also motivation, Allison. We know that so far, only about 35% of people eligible, 12 to 18, have gotten a shot. So I hope this gets that remaining section to have that conversation with their pediatrician or doctor. Second, we are hoping that the FDA will have some applications for an emergency authorization for the under 12 age group, but it might not be in time for the school year to start. So this was given great clarity that all these layered prevention measures, what does that mean? Masks, distance, having people who are sick not come to school, that's what is going to be the strategy until we have vaccines. And as you know, as Shaq just covered, even when we have the vaccines, Allison, I don't expect that we're going to have 100% of people vaccinated. So these are important. The guidance was necessary. Notice, though, it's local. You really do have to go based on if you're in Springfield, Missouri, very different picture than if you're in another part of the country.
All right, so let's talk about boosters. That's another hot topic today. Pfizer says it's developing a booster shot. Then the FDA, the CDC come out and say this. Americans who have been fully vaccinated do not need a booster shot at this time. FDA, CDC, and NIH are engaged in a science-based, rigorous process to consider whether or when it might be necessary. So, Dr. Patel, I'm just going to be honest with you. When I heard that announcement this morning, my first thought was, oh, crap, I better make sure I get one before my current Pfizer vaccination runs out. Then I hear this from the FDA and the CDC, and I think like plenty of other Americans, I'm confused about whether I'm good to go or not and how long I'm good to go or not. Your best medical advice here?
Yeah. So number one, you do not need a booster right now. And just to give you very sound science about why, it's not that the FDA and the NIH are kind of working against anybody. We now have real world evidence and also evidence from the clinical trials that took place last year, Allison, that people even a year ago still have antibodies that develop from the vaccine. So that's great news. I think the reason that Pfizer went ahead and did what they did and announced yesterday is they want to, it's not an easy process to snap your fingers and create a booster and tweak your vaccine. So they need to do this to show that if we do need a booster, by the way, not just for the Delta variant, but potentially a variant that comes after that, that it is ready and ready to go off the shelves for Americans. So, but that is very different than needing to go and get a booster. And let me be even more clear. It gets even more confusing if you have had an organ transplant or an immunocompromised condition, because you may be in that 5% of Americans, Allison, that actually could use some sort of booster shot based on data. So at the end of the day, Allison, if you are healthy and do not have one of those immune conditions, you do not need a booster now. This is really, think of the booster development as preventive so that we are not the way we were a year ago, kind of in our homes, scared and waiting for those vaccines. This could be ready to go if we need it. Big word, if.
Okay, so this is very comforting, Dr. Patel, to know that I'm okay right now, that many of us who don't have special conditions are okay, but also that they're prepared in case we need one down the line. Because as you mentioned, we all know how we rushed to try to get vaccines to folks and get those ready last year. So, okay, feeling good about this one. I got another question for you. In Maryland, one 100% of the people who died of COVID last month were not vaccinated. If ever there was an incentive to get the shot, I mean, that'll do it. What do you think the fall will look like in parts of the country with low vaccination rates? And do you think we have enough people in this country vaccinated to prevent another 2020 and avoid things like lockdowns and masking and social distancing?
I do. I think that we have had enough kind of a wall of immunity to prevent what we had to do a year ago. Having said that, we do not have enough immunity to be rid of COVID. So what we're going to see, not just come fall, but we're already seeing it right now, is pockets of the country that are not yet vaccinated at the kind of higher level. And Allison, that number we need to achieve moves every time a new, more infectious variant comes in. So don't think of it as we need to hit 70 and we're set. It changes the more variants and how infectious they are. So it could be 70, 75, 80. So we need to simply get more people vaccinated. Places where they are not vaccinated will see early outbreaks. But Allison, the virus knows no boundaries. So it will trickle in. And what I expect we'll see in the fall and winter are just kind of a simmering number of infections, but a lot less deaths than we would see with other infections and with COVID a year ago. I think that's critical. I don't think that this is good news. And I want to say that we're also watching Indonesia. We're watching countries where we're seeing 70,000, 80,000 cases a day. That's an opportunity for more variants to develop. We will have school. We will be working. Vaccinated Americans will have mostly normal activities. But the virus and kind of its threat will likely always be there.
Dr. Patel, so thankful for you. You're always honest with us, but I always find you to be very calming as well. You never frighten us, but you always tell us the truth. Thanks so much and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Elsa working its way up the East Coast, bringing some high winds and flash flooding along with it. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has the latest.
Hey there, Allison. Elsa made landfall earlier this week, but still packed quite a punch early this morning here in Freeport, New York. We saw some heavy wind gusts, strong showers, and the ground was already saturated from previous storms, so flash flooding was a big concern.
As Elsa slams the Northeast.
Oh my God.
Overnight, flash flooding and torrential rain from another system battering the region. New York City streets underwater, cascading into subway stations. One woman walking waist deep into the water, other riders using trash bags for cover. Drivers stranded on a flooded expressway rescued by a police barrier truck. In Philadelphia, heavy rain and winds causing fiery downed power lines. In New Jersey, dangerous storms pounding down on neighborhoods. Residents snapping photos of golf ball-sized hail. Drivers navigating flooded roads across Long Island.
We're seeing already dangerous rip currents and tides.
Officials warning residents to stay safe.
Be prepared for the possibility of power outages.
In Connecticut, residents stocking up as Elsa moves in and takes aim.
I have a generator. I have sump pumps. We have plenty of water stocked up.
Meanwhile, conditions have dramatically improved here in Freeport, New York. It is in the 80s right now. The sun is out and no major problems to report. This as Elsa finally makes its way out into the Atlantic.
President Biden cracking down on corporate monopolies with an executive order that promotes competition here in the U.S.
If your companies want to win your business, they have to go out and they have to up their game. Better prices and services, new ideas and products. That competition keeps the economy moving and keeps it growing.
NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli here with me. Mike, this is a pretty big order. It's got 72 different initiatives, if I counted them all. Would you hit us with the highlights and tell us more about the president's end goal here?
Yeah, Allison, this covers a wide range of areas, everything from agriculture to big tech, obviously the economy, a big focus here, including even whether you can get refunds for your baggage fees at the airports. The thing that the president focused mostly during his remarks this afternoon was something that he used to talk a lot about in the context of Jimmy John's, a sandwich chain. The way the president has looked at this as he's focused on middle-class economic growth is the idea that a minimum wage or barely minimum wage worker at a sandwich shop like that has to sign a non-compete agreement, which makes it hard for them to, as he has put it, go across the street and go to work for Burger King for an extra 5-10 cents an hour. Why are these things, still in our economy when that exact kind of competition would be beneficial to workers? But there's also a much broader part about this, which you think back to the Democratic presidential primary campaign. Some of the focus on so many candidates was about breaking up big business. The president also talked about antitrust as a focus as well. Take a listen.
The executive order I'm soon going to be signing commits the federal government to full and aggressive enforcement of our antitrust laws. No more tolerance for abusive actions by monopolies. No more bad mergers that lead to mass layoffs.
As another example of the kind of middle class focus of the president here, another thing that this order would target is excessive, in his view, licensing requirements. If you want to be, for instance, a hair braider in the state of Maryland, there's so much certification that you need to do in order to be able to get that job, so much that he thinks it's excessive. And so he's asked federal agencies to study these regulations and try to cut through some of that red tape, Allison.
Mike, that was such an excellent explanation. I'm so sorry I stopped listening at Jimmy John's. That's all I could think about. I haven't had Jimmy John's in so long. My God, I used to love that place when I lived in Pennsylvania. I got to ask you about health care costs, because I know the president's also tackling that one in this order. What's the administration doing on that front?
Yeah, another area here, the White House is going to be, instead of what we've seen in the past, the federal government standing in the way of states making agreements with Canada for cheaper prescription drugs to cross the border, this executive order would make it easier for states and tribal governments to do that. Another example here is the White House wants to make it easier for people to buy hearing aids over the counter. Think about what it requires for somebody who's hearing impaired to get a hearing aid. You have to schedule a doctor's appointment. You have to go to a specialist. You have to then get it specifically prescribed. Well, making it over the counter is a big way to try to cut costs here. And so there's a lot that the president wants to do in the areas of healthcare. Specifically, we're going to be looking at more in that human infrastructure reconciliation package, things like lowering the Medicaid eligibility age. But these are some sort of more common sense and things he can do through executive action that might help average Americans with their costs as well.
Mike, the White House announced today the president's heading to Philadelphia on Tuesday. He'll be giving a speech on voting rights there. It's an issue President Biden has said he wants to tour the country to discuss. What do you know about his mission and his particular message next week?
Yeah, they've been teasing this speech for a few weeks, and now they finally announced it's coming on Tuesday. Of course, it comes on the heels of that 2-hour meeting that the president held here at the White House yesterday with civil rights leaders. The White House is under a lot of pressure, the president specifically, to use that presidential bully pulpit a bit more, as we've seen Republican legislatures take a number of actions to try to restrict the right to vote and make it easier potentially for election administrators to overturn elections after the fact. So what the president has said is that this is going to be the first of many speeches to come. The White House really views this as much more of an election issue itself. They think Republicans can be penalized at the ballot box for some of these steps. And this is going to be going to Philadelphia, the city where they signed the Declaration of Independence, the founding documents of this country. The president really starting at a much higher level about this sacred right to vote.
Mike, the White House also saying today that President Biden spoke with Vladimir Putin. They kind of slipped that one in this afternoon. I think it came in, the information came in this afternoon. They talked about the latest Russian ransomware attack. What do you know about that call?
Yeah, as a summer thunderstorm now descends on the White House behind me, this was also a little bit of a surprise for those of us waiting for the press secretary's briefing today. The White House putting out that readout of the conversation between the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and President Biden, in which the president made it clear. He said, he underscored, the White House said, that the Russian president needs to do more to take action against cyber criminals in his country. And the president also reiterated what we know he told Putin in person just a few weeks ago, that the U.S. will do everything within its right to take action if there is not a response on the part of the Russian government. A senior administration official just briefed reporters a short time ago as well and said we might see some of these retaliatory actions of the kind the president has raised the possibility of taking even in the next few weeks.
Mike, this is unkind of me to do. I know it's pouring out there, but I got to ask before the week is over. You have a little update for us, don't you, on an election going on there at the White House?
Well, everyone is talking about the News Now bump that we gave to our good friend Kelly O'Donnell. She was running in that race for White House Correspondents Association president. I wore my button here as the polls were about to close just a few days ago. The election actually ended in a tie, Allison. If you believe that, if you believe every vote matters, it ended in a tie. And what happens in that case is there's a tie-breaking vote of the executive board of the WHCA. That was a landslide. Kelly O getting a 7-2 vote of the 9 members of the executive board, who all understand what we both know, that there's nobody with the great institutional knowledge of the White House and who is a better advocate of press freedom and of transparency, which is what she's going to be dedicating her presidency to here in a few years. We're all thrilled to see her on that board.
Well, we are so psyched for her. She didn't need our help at all. I wasn't surprised at all to hear the news that she won. So well deserved. Mike, you are an excellent campaign manager, if you will. Good work.
I do what I can. Thanks, Allison.
It's time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez. She's filling in on headlines today. We're so glad that she's here. Isa, take it away.
Hey, Allison, thanks for having me. We're starting today in Bangladesh, where at least 49 people are feared dead after a fire ripped through a food and beverage factory last night. Firefighters still fighting the blaze this afternoon. We still don't know how many people remain trapped inside or what started the fire. And in Alaska, a teenage passenger on a small plane taking control of the plane's yoke, causing it to nosedive. Luckily, the pilot was able to regain control and safely land the aircraft. The teen who was arrested says he tried to end his life. And Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban vowing not to give in to the European Union's pressure to repeal a new Hungarian law banning schools from using materials that are seen as promoting homosexuality. On his Facebook page, the Prime Minister writing, quote, "The European Parliament and the European Commission want that we let LGBTQ activists and organizations into the kindergartens and schools. Hungary does not want that," end quote. The European Parliament passing a resolution condemning the law and demanding that EU countries and the European Commission use every power to stop it. And a new watchdog report finding that the Chicago Police Department is losing prospective black officers, especially women, during its too long hiring process. The city's Office of the Inspector General analyzing Chicago police hiring practices from 2016 to 2018, finding that the hiring process, which takes more than a year, leads to a disproportionately high attrition rate for black candidates and especially black female candidates. The police department did not immediately respond to a request for comment. And some good news, Chinese officials announcing that giant pandas are no longer an endangered species after conservation efforts helping the population grow to more than 1,800 giant pandas. The species is now classified as vulnerable. That is the best news I could have woken up to this morning. I love watching those giant panda videos. They make me so happy. Allison.
Isa, I was just going to say that might be the best news we've had all week. Thank you so very much for a bright spot today.
The magnitude of this tragedy is growing each and every day. It's an aching hole in the center of this close-knit family here in Surfside.
At least 78 people now dead in Surfside, dozens more still missing as crews head into their third weekend searching the rubble of that horrific condo collapse. NBC News reporter Vaughn Hilliard is at the site. Vaughn, any progress in identifying more of those victims? What are you hearing from the crews there today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Allison. Substantial progress in the recovery of these individuals. Just this week alone, following that demolition of the existing structure, there have been 54 individuals recovered, 78 now total over these last 2.5 weeks here. And this recovery process was able to accelerate with these crews able to make these advancements. We will be receiving another update here in just a little over an hour from now, but we're continually beginning to understand more about these individuals, who they were, their situations. Well, there is also the reality that 60 more individuals are still yet to be recovered, believing to be potentially unaccounted for, potentially missing here. You know, we continue. It's hard when you have literally 78 individuals' bodies recovered, but with each of these lawsuits that have been coming in, including just one here in the last 24 hours on behalf of Jonah Handler, the 15-year-old who is actually one of the two survivors who was able to survive the collapse of that initial tower. He was pulled that early morning of Thursday when that tower collapsed, a lawsuit being filed by not only his father, but also the brother of his mom, who in fact passed away in that. But this is sort of the trauma that is experienced not only for a young survivor like Jonah, but also for these families whose loved ones have been recovered and those who are among the 60 plus who are still missing.
Vaughn, I have to ask you about another building. Today, residents of Crestview Towers returned to their homes very briefly after they were evacuated last week because of structural concerns. Could you tell us about that?
Exactly. That's the Crestview Towers. It was 1 week ago today that hundreds of individuals were told to immediately evacuate from their homes, just get out, because of concerns about major structural deficiencies with their building. That's about 10 miles from where we are now. Well, today, 1 week later, those residents were told that they each, for each one of those apartments, one individual would have 15 minutes to go and pull out their most important items here. And our crew, actually, Maria Pinheiro, our producer, was over there. I want to let you hear from Later Hurtado, who is one of those residents here this afternoon. Take a listen.
This is a bad situation. It's a terrible situation for us. I don't know what they say that the building is not unsafe. I don't know why. Because the other structure, the building is old.
There are multiple buildings like Crestview Towers that are of structural concern with lapsed certificates of safety precautions and understanding truly about what situation those buildings were in. All of this taken at high precautionary levels here while this search continues. And one other note is that the Broward County medical examiner, now Allison, has come in to assist Miami-Dade County's medical examiner because of this influx in bodies recovered here over just the last several days. Allison?
Vaughn, the news there, whether it's the families who are just so devastated, those other residents told you've got 15 minutes to grab everything you own. I just can't imagine what folks there are going through, and I know it's so difficult to report on. Thanks for all you've been doing as well.
Thanks, my friend.
The race is on in South Florida to make sure that other condo complexes are structurally sound. Experts there saying that the Surfside collapse could very well reshape Miami's real estate market. Let's bring in NBCNews.com reporter Phil McCausland. Phil, in your reporting, one real estate agent said, now you're going to see what we call condo terminations, where developers buy out old buildings, tear them down, and put up new ones. Can you talk to us about why that's happening?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. There's a few things going on, I think, that is worth noting. Condos across the state want to know that their building is safe, and so they're really putting those demands down for engineers to come in and check out their buildings. The issue is there's not enough engineers. So what that means is that those engineering reports are becoming more and more expensive. But the secondary issue is that once you even have that report in hand, then you're going to find out this is what's wrong with your building. And for some of these older buildings, some of these buildings that are 40 years old, 30 years old, you're looking at maybe 8 figures, 7 figures, and even shared across condo owners through assessments. You're looking at, tens of thousands of dollars, if not over 6 figures for some of these folks. So that's basically a second mortgage. And so what we're talking about is, especially for lower income owners, they're essentially being incentivized to potentially leave because they can't afford to stay. And when you're looking at a market where folks don't really want to buy a 40-year-old building anymore because of what happened in Surfside, that business opportunity is really there for developers to maybe plow down some of these older buildings and build something new that is going to cost a lot more money.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about who this is going to affect here, because you touched on this. But, if you look at an older building like Champlain Tower South that collapsed in Surfside, there were lower income tenants. There were retirees there. As you've mentioned, these are some of the people who could be most affected here. The rich folks want to be in the brand new buildings on the water with the best views, right? So what are the concerns here for those older or lower income Floridians? If we take all these buildings down, what do they do?
Well, I think their options are going to be much more limited potentially here in the future. Yep. This is going to be probably a slow trickle, right? I mean, it takes a while to buy out all the owners from a condo building. Mm-hmm. But I mean, these properties where these 30, 40-year-old buildings were built, they got premium property right there on the shoreline. Even Champlain Towers property, I mean, is valued over $100 million. So, I mean, developers want that, right? And they want to build on that land. And I mean, is a retiree going to be able to buy a condo anymore? Is someone who's a lower income, an immigrant family coming into Miami? Probably not.
Yeah, I was going to say potentially not. And we know how attractive it is to retire in Florida. A whole lot of folks do that. Let's talk about the housing market in South Florida, particularly in Miami. I mean, Phil, it's been red hot. Condo sales hit records this spring. They were spiked more than 200% in April, according to Miami's Association of Realtors. What could this do to the real estate market? I know you said it might not be an immediate change, but this could really turn this real estate market on its head.
Yeah, I mean, talking to real estate agents in the area, talking to other people who participate in the market here, I think it's already becoming clear that the interest in buyers for these older buildings, the condos there, I mean, it's just really dwindling and beginning to drop off a little bit. And if they are buyers are interested, they're going to want you to have that engineering report in hand. Otherwise there's just really no interest. And so the buildings that are getting looked at and the condos that are getting looked at are the ones that are built that were built since the year 2000. And those are the buildings that are probably kept up a little bit more, have fewer safety concerns so far. But per square foot, I mean, that is really, really expensive and it's going to price out so many people. So again, those lower income families, those retirees, I mean, they just can't necessarily find a home anymore in Miami Beach.
And Phil, how about insurance? I mean, we know storms, disasters like a condo collapse like we saw. It's never good news when you're looking for an insurance premium.
No, I mean, and historically, it's pretty tough here in Florida to get insurance coverage anyways. But this is only going to make things quite a bit more difficult and quite a bit more expensive. Talking to insurers, they said, this is not something we were too concerned about before, but this is something that we are going to pay closer attention to. In the past, they were really concerned about wind damage, obviously for being directly there on the coast and for storms. Now they said it's going to be a real mix of insurance that you're going to need to carry, and it's going to be much, much more expensive, and it's going to, again, price more and more people out.
Phil, it is going to be something to see how the real estate market changes there in Miami, and potentially even the skyline, right? I mean, it sounds like long-term could be a dramatic change. You're reporting really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on to talk with us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
It is time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Let's kick things off with a look at the markets, ending the week on a real high note. The Dow closing up nearly 450 points today, along with the S&P and NASDAQ, all three indexes closing at record highs, bouncing back from yesterday's concerns about COVID and the economy. We've got a special guest today. It's his first time with us on NBC News Now. Kenny Polcari, managing editor at Case Capital Advisors. Kenny, psyched to have you here. In your host of the Party Market Commentary today, you called yesterday risk off, today risk on, saying the markets are confused. We keep blaming any dips we see on COVID, but you're calling that a convenient excuse. So what moved the markets higher today? What is Wall Street worried about? And just a reminder for you, this is not a business channel, so don't get too far into the technical weeds, okay? But hit us with what the average investor needs to know here, please.
Right. I understand. So listen, the markets, had a little bit of nervousness yesterday, which is what we saw. They blamed it on COVID, which I think, and you saw in my note today, there are a whole range of other issues for the market to be concerned about. And the today, what they realized was after they had all those concerns yesterday and they tried to push the market lower, in fact, the market did find buyers, right, at about 10:30 in the morning and rallied back. While they closed lower last night, they still rallied back off their lows. And then that euphoria sense of we're coming into earnings, the news is not that bad, the economy is not going to slow down the way that the chatter made it sound with falling yields, and oh my God, the economy is going to go into a tailspin, and what are we going to do? All that stuff is really just anxiety building up. And so investors realize that. Algorithms, which really control a lot of the market, realized that and then took the market higher today. Now, I would say, for caution's sake, we're coming into earnings season. I know you're going to talk about it, but investors and the retail investors should just be patient, right? Don't get caught up in this, oh my God, I'm going to miss this trade. You're not going to miss the trade.
Great advice. You're not going to miss the trade. You can say it 100 times, though, right? We all always think we're going to miss the trade. We're going to miss the big spike. We're going to miss the big surge. I used to be a business reporter. I can't tell you how many times people used to say to me, I lost all this money. Should I sell my stock now? No, don't sell the stock. But they always ask. They can't help it.
No, but that's when
Kenny,
you
President
know they
Biden
always do the wrong thing.
Yeah. I know. We always make the wrong move. We just can't help ourselves. Kenny, President Biden out today with an executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. Here he is.
Capitalism without competition isn't capitalism. It's exploitation. Without healthy competition, big players can change and charge whatever they want and treat you however they want. And for too many Americans, that means accepting a bad deal for things that you can't go without.
The president basically going after big monopolies in industries like agricultural, airlines, banking, saying he's trying to boost competition. He's also trying to lower prescription drug prices. Your take on this, good or bad for the average American?
Listen, I think it's great for the average American. I will say competition is good. And he did say it at the very beginning. Capitalism without competition is not capitalism, right? You need healthy competition in order to create a really vibrant, robust marketplace, right? Where you're going to get competition on prices. And so I have to say, I think he's correct on this, and trying to create that competition will in fact end up driving prices a little bit lower. And so for the average American, that's going to be a good thing.
Kenny, you're also tweeting today about an op-ed from the Wall Street Journal editorial board that says the global tax deal, this is a deal that 130 countries signed on to last week, is bad for the United States and that Congress should read the fine print here very carefully. What don't you like about this deal? Why is this not good for us?
Well, because here's the deal. We're trying to do two things, right? They want to install a global tax deal, and then they want to raise corporate taxes here in the United States. And so the U.S. companies are going to get double whack. And listen, the Europeans love it. This is great for them because they're going to get a chance to take a bite out of the big U.S. tech companies, right? The Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles. And so therefore, the U.S. company is going to get doubly hurt. So I just suggest you want to do a global tax, that's fine. Then keep the corporate tax rate here in the United States where it is, or in fact, even cut it a little bit more if you're going to have now a global tax. But to have a global tax and then talk about raising corporate taxes on U.S. companies in this country, that's where you're going to hit the negative.
You make a strong argument there, Kenny. It was awesome having you on. Will you please come back?
I'd be happy to come back.
17 people arrested in the assassination of Haiti's president, 2 American citizens reportedly among them. In a dramatic news conference overnight, Haitian authorities lined up the suspects, there they are, for the world to see, along with a pile of weapons linked to the attack in the president's home. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez all over this story. So, Gabe, the State Department still hasn't confirmed that there are 2 American suspects, but Haitian officials have ID'd them. What can you tell us about them and the other 15 we saw there?
Hey there, Allison. Well, yes, Haitian government officials do identify those 2 U.S. citizens as 35-year-old James Salages and 55-year-old Joseph Vincent. Now, the New York Times, citing a Haitian judge involved in the investigation, reports that the 2 Americans were working as translators and that they said they were not in the room when President Moïse was killed. But as you're seeing right there, it was a dramatic news conference yesterday. The Haitian authorities, lined them up in front of the cameras, laid out those pile of weapons, also Colombian passports. We understand that there was a news conference in Colombia today where Colombian police now say that several security companies are under investigation for possibly recruiting some of these suspects. So still a lot of unanswered questions, Allison, at this point. But again, yes, 17 people arrested, a total of 28 people, 28 suspects that Haitian authorities say were somehow involved in this attack, Allison.
So given that number, Gabe, do you have a sense of how many people could still be at large? Do authorities have any idea how many people might be out there, where they could be? Just what's the scope of sort of what they're looking for here?
Well, certainly it's a wide-ranging investigation at this point. As you mentioned, the FBI and Homeland Security officials are being sent by the U.S. to Haiti to help in this investigation. At this point, Haitian authorities say that there are at least 8 or 9 people that are on the run at this point. And so this investigation continues. Don't know if they're still in the country or somehow made it out of the country. That was something that the U.S., the Haitian ambassador to the U.S. Would not rule out when I spoke with him earlier this week, Allison.
Gabe, hundreds of people were protesting outside police headquarters after their arrests. What are they demanding?
Look, there's a lot of skepticism here among the public in Haiti. They are skeptical of the government's account. Some of the protesters just don't believe it. They're questioning whether, this is the right group of people that was actually arrested, or whether they were actually the ones that ordered this attack, that paid for this attack. And one of the questions is, well, if supposedly this was such a professional group of killers, as authorities had said earlier in the week, how is it possible that they carried out this attack but were then caught relatively quickly, within a short amount of time? And I should point out, Allison, actually, many of the suspects were rounded up inside the Taiwanese embassy, which had been broken into. Another bizarre twist in this whole investigation.
Yeah. Wow. Gabe, it's still not entirely clear who's in charge in Haiti either right now, correct? President Moise had appointed a new prime minister, Ariel Henry, just 2 days before his assassination. Now, Henry and the interim prime minister, Claude Joseph, are both claiming power. So do we have any sense of who's in charge? What's the latest there?
Well, there is a power struggle at this point, Allison, as you point out. However, the incumbent prime minister, the one who was in place before this new one was appointed, he is claiming to be in charge. He is recognized by the U.S. as being in charge. The UN Security Council met yesterday to discuss this in a succession plan, or what's next for Haiti. And Haitian officials assured members of the Security Council that elections would go on as planned later this year. Allison.
Gabe, an absolutely wild story there. And as you mentioned, there's some new twists and turns every day. Thank you for your reporting. The Tokyo Games start 2 weeks from today, but with the state of emergency in Japan, there are some Olympic-sized hurdles to clear before the athletes there can go for the gold. NBC News senior national correspondent Tom Yamas is in Tokyo.
Allison, the scramble is on, from athletes to organizers to broadcasters, even the First Lady, all getting ready for a very unique Olympic experience. Now, the White House says Dr. Jill Biden is assessing her feasibility to possibly travel here to Tokyo while it is under a state of emergency. And we're talking to the athletes. We're asking them how they're preparing, getting ready to compete in the Tokyo Games without cheering fans.
The Olympic torch now in Tokyo, completing its journey around the country as the Games head into uncharted territory. The Prime Minister declaring that COVID-19 state of emergency, the Olympics forced to move forward but without spectators. From the opening ceremony at the National Stadium to gold medal competitions across Tokyo, the athletes will be there but in empty arenas. The goal? To limit Olympic festivities. Restaurants and bars also being asked not to serve alcohol.
Even the Olympic rings that illuminate Tokyo Bay are being shut off early at night because they don't want to attract crowds.
And now the athletes also preparing for an Olympics like no other. U.S. diver Krista Palmer will be competing in 2 events on the springboard. She's already visualizing competing in an empty facility.
How do you sort of get yourself then in the zone?
I think for me, I will visualize the fact that there won't be anybody in the stands, but that's okay because I know there's going to be all of my teammates there supporting me.
And Hoda recently sitting down with the U.S. women's gymnastics team, asking Simone Biles, who is used to competing in front of sellout crowds, how the lack of fans may impact her.
Do you think it will affect how you perform, Simone?
Personally, I thrive under pressure, so I'm a little bit worried how it's going to affect me once we get over there.
Two-time Olympian and gold medalist Katie Ledecky says the ban on fans won't take away from the spirit of the games.
Everyone is getting together in this one city for the opportunity to pursue their goals that they've worked for 5 years. And I still think that's a really beautiful thing. And I know this is going to be kind of a made-for-TV Olympics.
I spoke with NBC Sports to ask them how they're going to produce these Olympics without the cheering fans. Executive producer of the Olympics, Molly Solomon, tells me they're ready for this. They were preparing for this just in case it might happen. They say we're going to hear and listen to the Olympics like we never have before, because without that crowd noise, we're going to hear the athletes more. We're going to hear what they hear. We're also going to be with the loved ones of these athletes all over America in their living rooms as they watch their relatives compete in the Olympics because they couldn't travel. It's going to be a new type of Olympic experience, but still a very exciting one.
Britney Spears' public battle with her father raising new concerns about conservatorships. They're supposed to protect the elderly or vulnerable, but what happens when they're abusive? NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce takes a closer look at conservatorships and how legally challenging it can be to end them.
This is like that movie that just came out.
I Care a Lot.
Yes.
It's a great movie.
The court has ruled that you require assistance in taking care of yourself. I'm fine. I'm afraid it's not up to you to decide.
So even if her character was a little exaggerated, that could happen.
Marcia Southwick is the director of the National Association to Stop Guardian Abuse. She says the 2020 film I Care a Lot stretched some truths about conservatorships, but it did expose the lack of regulation in the system. Now these guardianships are facing new scrutiny.
Britney has truly changed things because of her fame.
It's estimated that over 1 million people are currently in guardian arrangements. Most of them are elderly or disabled.
A conservatorship in court, that most of the time I see an elderly person is almost wheeled in to the courthouse and they don't speak any words on their own behalf. I think what's different about Britney is that so much of her actual ability to manage her own affairs and make personal choices on her own behalf is actually available by social media.
Now that Britney Spears is amplifying the conversation around conservatorships, I wanted to learn more about the legal recourse to get out of one. So I called Los Angeles attorney Benny Rochon, who litigates these arrangements.
What does the law say about terminating conservatorships?
A conservatorship typically is in place when a person cannot take care of their basic needs for food, shelter, and clothing. And so if the circumstances have changed such that a person has regained that capacity, the law says a conservatorship can be terminated. What would need to happen formally is that a petition to terminate the conservatorship on the basis of changed circumstances needs to be filed.
Despite Spears' explosive testimony last month, the court denied her request to remove her father from his role as conservator, adding she is unable to, quote, manage her financial resources. Spears can file another petition, but if her father and co-conservator Jamie Spears continues to oppose those petitions, this case could end up before a jury. Jamie Spears denies his daughter's allegations and is demanding the court investigate her claims. For now, Britney Spears' fate is in the hands of Judge Brenda Penny, who has the power to modify the conservatorship or terminate it altogether.
Absolutely, the court can make it less restrictive and could put orders in place that gives her more power and authority.
In Southwick's experience, some conservatees have found more success outside of court.
The only way they really do it is through the press. If the press gets involved, they can escape this. And if advocacy gets involved, they can escape this. But it's very, very difficult.
That's why she's pushing for reform.
First of all, we need data. There's no central database to keep track of the people who have guardianship over innocent people. And the other thing that needs to happen is there needs to be stronger monitoring over the conservatorship.
And advocates like Southwick may be witnessing a turning point. Legislators across the country, including California State Assembly member Evan Lowe, are taking a closer look at conservatorship abuse in their states.
We introduced the legislation, and many thought this was in response to Britney Spears specifically, when in fact, countless household names reached out to our office to say, wow, we also have had problems.
And on the national level, Senators Warren and Casey are calling on the federal government to do more to prevent fraud and exploitation.
Much of this conversation is around Britney Spears, but what's important to remember is that everyday individuals who cannot take care of themselves, those who are elderly, those who are impaired, that's what this conversation really is about, helping those most vulnerable.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.